In the 1950s, a science fiction writer and attempted self-help guru wanted to get out of paying taxes, so he created a religion based on some of his work. It was called Scientology. He claimed he had been a prince in his past life and told people they could control their lives with their very own minds, something he taught how to do in his religion. He became known for bashing the medical industry and anyone who dared question his methods. While many laughed at his ideas and some countries even deemed Scientology a cult, he pressed on, eventually recruiting some of Hollywood's most famous faces, celebrities like John Travolta, Priscilla Presley, Kirstie Alley, Michael Pena, Tom Cruise, and many more. Celebrity Scientologists diligently praise their religion for helping them better their lives in all areas. But behind the scenes, a twisted and tax-free empire was being built. A billion-dollar church that attacked and harassed ordinary people, broke into FBI buildings to steal confidential documents, imprisoned many of their own believers, and even made some disappear. With the rise of the internet and smart technology, it became difficult for this cult to hide their secrets. This included the hostile takeover to become the leader of the church by a man named David Miscavige, aka Tom Cruise's BFF. Celebrities who once sang its praises were now questioned for their support of such an alleged dangerous organization, and those answers, along with Scientology defectors, would reveal a world more dark than anyone could imagine. This is the story and scandals of Scientology, David Miscavige, the church's golden boy himself Tom Cruise, and the women left in his wake. Before we begin, a quick word from the sponsor of this video, Delete Me. Let's talk about something creepy: data brokers. Data brokers are corporations that collect huge amounts of personally identifiable information. Things like social security numbers, birthdays, past and recent addresses, and more, and package it all together to sell our personal information to anyone willing to pay, putting us at risk for identity theft or worse. No federal privacy laws for how our data is mined and shared currently exist. And in 2022, the most targeted age group for identity theft were 30 to 39-year-olds. It makes sense when there's so much of our personal information getting shared online without our consent. But trying to remove one's name, age, address, phone number, past addresses, and the names of relatives can be time-consuming and stressful. Instead of spending countless hours finding every website on the internet that contains your private info and submitting requests to get it taken down, get it done in minutes with Delete Me. Delete Me is an amazing service that will not just find and remove your personal information from hundreds of data broker websites, but they'll continuously scan for new data that shows up and get that removed as well. Delete Me searches all the top data broker websites, and on average, they find and remove over 2,000 pieces of personal data for a customer in their first 2 years. To date, they've removed over 100 million pieces of data for their customers. So if you want to get your personal information removed from search results on the web, go to joindeleteme.com/notthegoodgirl. Delete Me is offering 20% off their privacy plans to all my viewers with my code NOTTHEGOODGIRL. Once again, that's joindeleteme.com/notthegoodgirl. Now, back to the video. Tom Cruise was born Thomas Cruise Mapother IV on July 3, 1962 in Syracuse, New York to Thomas Cruise Mapother III and Mary Lee Pfeiffer. Tom had 3 sisters, Leanne, Marianne, and Cass. Their mother, Mary Lee, worked as a special education teacher, but due to Tom's father's job as an electrical engineer, the family moved all over the United States and even spent part of their lives in Canada. But life at home wasn't good. Tom once described his father as a bully and a coward in a 2006 interview with Parade magazine, saying, quote, "It was a great lesson in my life, how he'd lull you in, make you feel safe, and then bang, He was the kind of person where if something goes wrong, they kick you. For me, it was like, there's something wrong with this guy, don't trust him, be careful around him. There's that anxiety." End quote. Life wasn't any better for Tom at school either. In 12 years, he attended 15 different schools, struggled with dyslexia, and claimed he was bullied regularly. But there was one thing going well for Tom: soccer. With things not going well at home, Mary Lee secretly made the decision to leave Tom's father. She told Tom and his sisters to have their bags packed, hidden, and ready. In 1974, the time finally came when Mary Lee was able to leave, and she moved the children to Louisville, Kentucky. Tom was 12 years old, and by his 13th birthday, his parents were divorced. Mary Lee eventually remarried a man named John South when Tom was 16. John was a World War II vet and a devout Catholic. This rubbed off on young Tom, who eventually enrolled in St. Francis Seminary just outside of Cincinnati and decided he wanted to become a Catholic priest. One of his friends from seminary, Shane Dempler, validated Tom's desire to be part of the ministry. According to Dempler, quote, "He had a very strong Catholic faith. We went to Mass, spent time in the chapel, and enjoyed hearing stories from the priest. We thought the priest had a great lifestyle, and we were really interested in priesthood." End quote. Maybe Tom realized their lifestyle wasn't that exciting because his interest began to fade when he began breaking rules. He would allegedly sneak out to smoke cigarettes and steal liquor from the priest's private rooms. And so, Tom's path to priesthood was cut short after getting caught. The priest wrote a letter to Tom's family and said that although they liked him, they would prefer if he didn't return. This departure meant Tom needed to find another purpose in life. So at his new high school in Glen Ridge, New Jersey, he joined the wrestling team and eventually discovered acting when he performed in several plays at Glen Ridge High. Through these high school performances, Tom found his passion. Tom wasn't a fan of his stepfather in the beginning, but eventually grew close to John, saying, quote, "In the beginning, I felt threatened by my stepfather. There's a part of you that's in love with your mother, but John is such a wise, smart man. He loved my mother so much that he took us all in, 4 young people." End quote. John is also how Tom got his start in acting, as his stepfather paid for his way to New York to pursue his passion once he graduated high school in 1980. Now 18 years old and determined to become a star, Tom started the first few years of his acting career taking small parts in movies as part of the supporting cast. But casting directors soon believed Tom's charisma and talents were undeniable, and he eventually booked his breakout role in 1983's Risky Business. The film was both a commercial and critical success. The film had a budget of $6.2 million, but grossed more than $63 million. Contrary to popular belief, the iconic dancing scene in Risky Business was not improvised by Tom. The scene was choreographed and rehearsed before filming and directed by Paul Brickman, who came up with the idea of the dancing scene. That scene, however, would become one of Tom's most famous moments of his acting career. In 1985, Tom was working on the set of Top Gun when he was introduced to another actress named Mimi Rogers at a dinner party. Tom was attracted to her, but she was dating one of his friends. That didn't last long, though, as Tom and Mimi hit it off and soon began dating. That following year, Top Gun was released and became the highest-grossing U.S. film of 1986. This success cemented Tom as one of Hollywood's bankable stars. Tom Cruise was now a superstar, and by this time he was madly in love with Mimi Rogers. And this is where Scientology and the greatest bromance of all time enters our story. You see, Mimi is the daughter of a man named Phil Spickler. In the 1950s, Phil worked directly with L. Ron Hubbard in the founding Church of Scientology in Washington, D.C. To understand how, through Mimi, Tom became entangled in Scientology, later becoming its brightest star, top recruiting tool, and BFF to its leader, aka dictator David Miscavige, we first need to go back to the beginning and take a look at what it means to be a Scientologist, and more importantly, how and why Scientology was created by a broke science fiction writer named L. Ron Hubbard, also known to devoted Scientologists as L. Rach. L. Ron Hubbard holds the Guinness Book of World Records for most published works by one author, 1,084 to be exact. Unlike most religions, the Church of Scientology was founded in living history. Lafayette Ronald Hubbard was born on March 13, 1911, in Tilden, Nebraska. His father was a naval officer, so the family moved around often and lived in Guam, China, and the Philippines. L. Ron Hubbard was an avid reader who was particularly interested in science fiction and adventure stories. When he was just 13 years old during the Great Depression, he published his first book in the pulp fiction genre. Writers at that time were paid a penny a word, so Hubbard wrote a lot, literally wearing himself out and dripping sweat over his typewriter. In fact, much of what Scientology is can be found in his early fiction novels. Ideology like having a reactive mind, engrams, and going clear, but more on that later. Despite his early academic success, he failed his first-year exams at university where he was studying to be a civil engineering student. After that, Hubbard returned to writing, but despite publishing a number of books, he seemed unable to make a name for himself, and the royalties weren't enough to live on. Everything would change, however, at the outbreak of World War II, when he followed in his father's footsteps and enlisted as a naval officer. Hubbard was put in charge of a naval ship, but this would be for less than 90 days, and his military career was short-lived after he disregarded orders and held target practice off a ship. He claimed he was training his men, but what he really did was wade into Mexican territory and shoot at Mexican islands. Fortunately, no one was hurt, and in his tribunal, Hubbard attempted to blame his men, saying they were extremely inexperienced and needed target practice, and he thought the islands were part of U.S. territory. It was written in his file by an admiral that, quote, "This officer is lacking in the essential qualities of judgment, leadership, and cooperation. He acts without forethought as to probable results," end quote. Hubbard was never put in charge of a military vessel again. Not long after, he was discharged from the U.S. military. But if one spoke to Hubbard, they would believe he was a decorated war hero due to the tall tales he would tell. Such is a tale he told to his first girlfriend after the war, Sarah Northrop. He told Sarah he captained a ship that had been downed in the Pacific, thus being forced to spend weeks in a raft where he was blinded by the sun. He claimed to even have had a broken back, but thanks to certain methodologies which would later become the basis of Scientology, he cured himself. But his 900-page military file proved otherwise. Hubbard was not a decorated war hero, nor was he ever on a ship that sank, and he spent no time adrift in the Pacific. In fact, military records state his only wounds while in service were conjunctivitis and an ulcer. After being discharged from the Navy, Hubbard rediscovered his passion for writing. In 1950, he published a best-selling book titled Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health. This was to become the foundation of what we now know as Scientology. Hubbard married Sarah Northrop, who was 13 years his junior when he was 35 years old. He was abusive to Sarah, and she would later speak on how Hubbard told her the only way to make any real money was to have a religion. Hubbard expected to sell 6,000 copies of Dianetics, but it did so much more. Dianetics sold over 16,000 copies a month and remained on the bestseller list for 100 weeks. According to former Scientology chief spokesperson Mike Rinder, people were attracted to Dianetics because one of its theories is to discover things that have been upsetting or traumatic to you, and if you can observe and identify what happened, the power of that event to influence you today is removed. In other words, Dianetics purported that through practice, one could take any harmful or painful memories and through a series of basic steps, simply throw them away. These could be memories from something as profoundly traumatic as war or a family estrangement, or something small like a minor argument with a spouse. With this success, Hubbard was paid lucratively to give lectures. He also established organizations which hosted Dianetics-based self-improvement groups. People would pay up to $500 per person for Dianetics trainings in the 1950s. That's equivalent to $5,800 today. Central to the teachings of Dianetics is the practice of auditing. Audits are a type of unproven talk therapy where an auditor assesses a person's subconscious mind to identify blockages that are stopping them from achieving clarity or success in life. In Dianetics, these blockages are referred to as engrams, which Hubbard claimed are remnants of traumatic experiences that every soul has experienced either in this life or in a previous one. A person can only have their engrams cleansed or removed by undergoing audits. The more engrams you have, the more audits you need to go through, and the more you need to pay for each session. Once a follower has completed the required number of audits, they are considered clear. With more than 500 groups being ran across the United States, Hubbard realized that there was more money to be made in selling self-improvement than in writing books. Dianetics believers were so determined to improve themselves that they would pay whatever price he demanded to have a personalized experience. In their minds, paying more would equal better results. As the Dianetics momentum built, Hubbard rolled out a tiered structure of levels that his followers could achieve by going through audits or undertaking training in Dianetics. He told his followers that by going through audits and paying their way into the higher levels, they could increase their IQ, perfect their health, and rediscover suppressed supernatural powers. They could also be completely healed from any disease and immune from any illness. By then, demand was so high that Hubbard couldn't carry out all of the audits on his own, so he began offering paid training to others who wanted to become Dianetics auditors. During this time, his wife Sarah claimed that Hubbard became extremely paranoid, delusional, and arrogant. He believed he was godlike and had the power to cure mankind. Sarah told him if he didn't seek the help of a psychologist, she would leave him. Not one to take orders, this enraged Hubbard, and one day when Sarah wasn't around, he kidnapped their daughter and fled to Cuba. But Hubbard didn't know how to parent, so he put her in the care of two women who were cruel to the child. Then he called Sarah and told her he had killed their daughter and it was her fault. Then he'd call back another day and say that their daughter was still alive. Then another day he'd say she was dead. This went on, tearing Sarah apart. Fortunately, their daughter was alive, and eventually Hubbard came back to the States with her and gave Sarah custody in their divorce. Then he wiped out all their joint bank accounts and left them with nothing. Financially, things took a turn for Hubbard in early 1951, when his once die-hard believers began to poke holes in the teachings of Dianetics, and scientists questioned his teachings, claiming they weren't evidence-based and had no basis in psychology like Hubbard claimed. It also came to light that Hubbard stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from the foundation responsible for managing the self-improvement programs and offering audits. This left the foundation in financial ruin, and in 1952, it went bankrupt. In the ensuing legal battle, Hubbard also lost the rights to the original Dianetics book. The broke author turned self-help guru was now at a crossroads and all bets were off. Hubbard knew it was now or never to do what he had known all along would bring him great wealth. He founded a religion. But this was no spiritual awakening. This was business. Hubbard mailed a letter about his new idea to one of his close followers, writing, "We don't want a clinic. We want one in operation, but not in name. Perhaps we could call it a spiritual guidance center. Think up its name, will you? And we could put in nice desks and our boys in neat blue with diplomas on the walls, and 1, knock psychotherapy into history, and 2, make enough money to shine up my operating scope, and 3, keep the HAS solvent. It is a problem of practical business. I await your reaction on the religion angle. In my opinion, we couldn't get worse public opinion than we have had or have less customers with what we've got to sell." End quote. Scientology has no messiah, no deity, no godlike beings. The reality is much more simple. A broke science fiction writer needed cash, and he had access to thousands of people willing to listen to what he had to say. In 1954, Hubbard established the first branch of the Church of Scientology in Los Angeles, California, and attained an unaccredited doctorate. He began to refer to himself as Dr. Hubbard. Hubbard positioned the church as a science-based religion founded largely on his Dianetics teachings, with the practice of Scientology being about self-discovery and self-improvement. Unlike most religions, Scientologists aren't expected to worship a higher being, but instead participate in practices that will enlighten and release them from their inner flaws. In Scientology, members gain spiritual enlightenment by progressing through a series of tiers on what's known as the bridge to total freedom. When a member graduates from one step to the next, they will be rewarded with a supernatural ability which had been dormant inside of them. But what really sets Scientology apart from other religious structures is the amount of money and time required to move up these steps. According to ex-Scientologist Leah Remini, a Scientologist will spend a minimum of 2.5 hours every single day studying, being audited, or doing work for Scientology. And every parishioner will spend close to $250,000 in their lifetime as they move up the bridge. However you have to get the money, you do it. Whether you have to take out a second mortgage, pull money out of your retirement accounts, or get a second or third job, you make it happen. The cost to move up the bridge has been one of the biggest criticisms of Scientology. But despite the critics, Hubbard pressed ahead with his new religion, and Scientology began to attract followers. With those followers came money. At that point, Hubbard knew that in order to give Scientology credibility, he would need to give his new religion an origin story. In a diss to aliens everywhere, the founding belief of Scientology is based on the existence of what Hubbard called an evil alien emperor named Xenu, who brought billions of aliens to Earth more than 70 million years ago. Scientologists believe we are all one of these beings who forgot about our supernatural powers after becoming trapped inside human bodies. Beneath the mind and soul is what Hubbard called a thetan. The thetan has lived through thousands of lifetimes and is waiting to be revealed. Only by undergoing auditing and various other treatments can they be released and our powers restored. Hubbard wrote that we've all lived past lives. He conveniently claimed in his past lives that he was a Venetian and Italian prince. However, because Hubbard didn't yet have the story fully written, he decided to withhold a bulk of the information from Scientologists until they advanced up the bridge to total freedom. But before one begins their journey on the bridge, the goal is to become, in what Hubbard calls, a state of clear. Scientologists are given the status of clear when a person is deemed to be free of the influence of engrams, supposed unwanted emotions or painful traumas which Scientology claims are not readily available to the conscious mind. Scientology states that human beings accumulate a reactive mind with anxieties and psychosomatic illnesses due to receiving engrams throughout their current or past lives, and that by applying Dianetics, every single person can obtain the status of clear. The next level of spiritual development is that of an operating thetan, aka OT. Once a person becomes OT, they can then begin ascending the bridge to total freedom. As each Scientologist ascends the bridge and spends more money, they're given bits of information deemed highly confidential. So secretive, in fact, that one former member stated in the Going Clear documentary, by the time he got to the bridge's third level called OT3, he was told he had to carry all its secret material in a locked briefcase, because if the info got out, it could cause harm to people not adequately prepared to read it. But it's not just about being given more information. Scientologists are told as they ascend the bridge, they'll gain special powers. In the beginning bridge levels, one can expect to eradicate sickness from their body and develop supernatural powers. But that's just the beginning. Hubbard wrote that only members at the highest thetan levels were clear enough to be trusted with the most important information, meaning as they become more entrenched in the religion, members will gladly part with their money to become more enlightened and seen as more advanced than other Scientologists. But on their way up the bridge, one of the biggest mistakes a member could make is to share the information they've learned with others. This includes a lower-ranked Scientologist or even their Scientologist spouse. to leak what they consider confidential information could get a Scientologist fined $100,000. The only way for Scientologists to come by this knowledge is to buy their way into the upper echelons of the church. After paying a few $100,000 and undergoing grueling rounds of auditing, one can move up the ranks and be given access to secret texts. The story might sound unbelievable, but for L. Ron Hubbard, this was exactly the genre of writing for which he was known: science fiction.
Okay, so you guys ready to start?
Yeah.
Good, start.
Students often spend thousands of dollars to take more and more courses and counseling called auditing.
A foxhound? A dachshund?
They find problem areas by using an e-meter, which Scientologists claim can read thoughts, or by modeling with Play-Doh. The goal is to become what they call clear.
Hubbard preached that Scientology's goal was to create a civilization without insanity, criminals, or war, where people can prosper, honest beings have rights, and where man is free to rise to greater heights. Within 3 years, Scientology was attracting followers from the upper echelons of society, and Hubbard was being paid more than $250,000 a year, or over $2.6 million in today's money. While some people might join Scientology or any other religion due to being in an emotionally vulnerable place in their lives, what attracts some to Scientology is the sense of exclusivity, of being chosen and special. One ex-Scientologist described it like this: "It felt exciting in many ways. You felt that you're part of a group that is changing the world, even quite possibly the only group that can. You feel that you have a lot of knowledge and a lot of tools at your disposal. You understand life better than normal people, and you can do something about it, improve the circumstances around you. It is adventurous, things move fast, you feel privileged to be part of it." And this was how a regular person described Scientology. Celebrity Scientologists, on the other hand, are akin to gods in the church. In the 1960s, celebrities such as Leonard Cohen, Rock Hudson, and members of the Grateful Dead could be seen mingling in Scientology's LA church. Hubbard wanted to make life for a celebrity Scientologist intoxicating, so in 1969 he purchased the Celebrity Center with the idea to lure in Hollywood elite. Inside, it hosts a restaurant and a hotel called the Manor Hotel, where celebrities can stay as long as they'd like while in LA. To attract upcoming talent, the Celebrity Center holds a variety of classes on acting lessons, voice acting, and how to break into Hollywood. The Celebrity Center is said to have an indoor swimming pool, garden terraces, and a greenhouse. With the glamorous events and parties held inside the Celebrity Center for the wealthy few, these icons of culture would become Scientology's most enticing marketers. But beneath the stardom and shiny lights, not all that glitters is gold. If you notice the screenshot of the man who wrote what at first felt like to be a Scientologist, under his name he claims to have been declared a suppressive person. A suppressive person is the lowest of the low. It's comparable to how Christians view demons, except in Scientology, anyone can become a suppressive person, also known as an SP. Even within families, SPs are cut off or disconnected, many without explanation. In order to identify SPs, especially if they were an active member of Scientology, Hubbard encouraged Scientologists to spy on one another. In fact, church members are required to submit knowledge reports about anything their fellow believers do which might negatively impact the church. Anyone who is critical of Scientology can be declared a suppressive person. The scrutiny of Scientology's members didn't only come from within the church. A wave of concern was growing in medical circles, especially around the use of e-meters during audits. In 1962, Hubbard introduced the use of electropsychometers as a critical component for auditing. The devices send a current of electricity through the person being audited. Hubbard claimed that the auditor can read the meter to indicate whether the person's engrams have been cleared. He also claimed that an experienced auditor could interpret electrical signals to assess a person's emotional state, even when they are not talking. The use of e-meters is considered to be pseudoscience, and in recent times, the devices come with an affixed label stating that the device is incapable of improving health and is used specifically for spiritual purposes. In the same year that e-meters were rolled out, the future darling of Scientology was born in Syracuse, New York, with little to indicate his future fame or the critical role he would play in the advancement of Scientology. By 1965, Scientology was under investigation by the French authorities, the IRS in the United States, and by the Victorian government in Australia. Subsequent reports accused the religion of brainwashing, extortion, blackmail, and negatively impacting the mental health of followers. The examinations of the inner workings of the religion forced Hubbard to move out of his mansion and into hiding. In reality, this meant he was living on his ship, the Apollo, in international waters. The Apollo was described as the floating headquarters for Scientology. By 1968, Australia had banned Scientology and labeled it a cult. This created the mindset in many Scientologists at the time that it was Scientology against the world. Because his headquarters was at sea, this allowed Hubbard to sail away from any one country's jurisdiction when necessary. The ship was staffed by members of a faction of Scientology referred to as the Sea Org. Sea Org members are considered Scientology's most dedicated and senior followers. They present themselves as a paramilitary naval group whose sole purpose is to maintain order within the church and protect it from outside influence, such as that from governmental overreach. To become a member of the Sea Organization, members had to undergo months of strict training and indoctrination. When they passed the requirements, they spent their days carrying out unpaid labor aboard one of the church ships. These ships were responsible for transporting Hubbard across international waters in his effort to avoid detection. And there's one more caveat for Sea Org members. Sea Org members must pledge their service for 1 billion years. That's not a joke. They literally mean 1 billion years. Scientology allows minors to also join the Sea Org. Thus, children sign these billion-year contracts. Many don't even finish high school before signing their life away and becoming a Sea Org member. Normally, that would be illegal, but in the United States, when it comes to religion and accountability, nothing is normal. While Hubbard lived aboard his fleet of ships, he maintained control over the church from an arm's length with the support of a team of trusted advisors. During his 8 years at sea, he had plenty of time to focus on writing more of the secret texts about the origins of Scientology. But despite Hubbard's efforts to dodge and downplay the criticisms being thrown at his new religion, there was another wave of legal battles coming his way. Some of the information appeared to be coming from members inside the faith, and so in 1968, Hubbard issued directives to every member of the church that they must cut off all communication with anyone deemed to be a threat to the church. He encouraged members to shun their families if they were not Scientologists, and for employees to leave their workplaces and only work for a Scientologist. He also established an agency within the church which was responsible for public relations and dealing with media attention. With his third wife as head of the Guardian's office, they also began filing lawsuits against anyone who spoke out against the church. With this latest directive, Scientology shifted into an authoritarian operating style. It began to issue directives as to what its members could watch and read, how children were raised, what members could wear, and where they could travel. The leaders of the organization began to keep tabs on members, and more people than ever before were labeled SPs with no explanation as to what they had done to be disconnected. In some instances, family members would arrive home only to find any sign of their partner or parents gone. Church authorities would tell a tale of the terrible things they had done to deserve being disconnected, and they didn't allow any member to question their supreme authority on the matter. The church also set strict requirements for daily studying of Scientology doctrine. No dissent from Hubbard's rules were allowed, and no questions could be asked. Members were not allowed to express doubt, disbelief, sadness, denial, guilt, fear, or any emotion that could be seen as critical of Scientology. You were either in or you were out. There was no middle ground. Hubbard taught that individuals are responsible for anything that happens to them. This line of thinking is used by most cults and abusers, as it allows for victim blaming. If a cult, abusive partner, or high control organization harms someone, whether mentally, emotionally, or physically, the indoctrinated individual will look inward, believing they must have done something to cause said harm, thus removing the abuser or organization of any and all responsibility. In 1975, a young man read Dianetics and became enthralled with L. Ron Hubbard. He had been struggling in his career and had a lack of confidence, but after a coworker on a movie set gave him a copy of Dianetics, he turned to Scientology. That young man was John Travolta. Through Travolta's regular auditing sessions, moving up the bridge, and time spent in the Celebrity Center, he became more confident. He also started getting movie parts left and right. Almost anything he tried out for, he got the role, and those closest to him noticed he gave Scientology all the credit. Scientology instills the belief that everything good that happens to you is because of Scientology, but everything bad that happens in your life is your fault. But what Travolta or other Scientologists don't talk openly about are security checks, aka sec checks. Unlike auditing, which is supposed to be more therapeutic for the person receiving the auditing, with the auditor only listening and asking basic questions, sec checks are designed to find out how bad a person really is and/or what evil thoughts they might harbor. The church wants to hear your crimes. A crime in Scientology is a serious violation made by a Scientologist. This can be things like prosecuting another Scientologist, not applying Scientology correctly, or speaking ill of a high-ranking executive or Sea Org member. All this information is documented by the church, and sec checks can begin on members as young as 6 years old. Until one completes a sec check, they can be prevented by the church from moving up the bridge. Depending on how long each sec check lasts, one could pay $800 per session for the church to interrogate them. John Travolta was one of Scientology's biggest celebrity supporters. That is, until Tom Cruise came along. But just 1 year after Travolta joined, Scientology would undergo one of its most heinous scandals of all time. A scandal that involved breaking into a federal courthouse, bomb threats, an FBI investigation, and a giant attempt to ruin a young woman's life. In the 1970s, a young woman heard a knock at her apartment door. When she asked who it was, a man called out that he had a flower delivery for Paulette Cooper. The woman opened the door when suddenly the man pulled out a weapon from the bouquet of flowers and held it to her temple. Fortunately, the weapon jammed, but he then put his hands around her neck and a struggle ensued. Finally, the woman broke away, letting out a loud scream which sent the flower delivery man running. That man was not a florist or a delivery driver, but a Scientologist, and that young woman was not Paulette Cooper, but her cousin who looked similar. The actual Paulette Cooper, a freelance journalist in her mid-20s who authored several books and interviewed celebrities like Marlon Brando and Jackie Kennedy, had been declared an enemy of Scientology, and she was now one of their biggest targets. In 1968, as a struggling young journalist looking for an exciting story, Paulette decided to write about a fairly unknown organization called Scientology. In her article, she claimed their e-meter produced questionable results, that Hubbard lied about his credentials, that Charles Manson had called himself a Scientologist, and that some defectors claimed they had been psychologically damaged by Scientology and financially ripped off and harassed, among other allegations. A prestigious English magazine by the name of Harper's Queen published her article. That magazine is known today as Harper's Bazaar. Paulette decided to expand on that article, and in 1971, she published a book titled The Scandal of Scientology. Paulette had no way of knowing that this would cause her world to come crumbling down. After moving to a safer apartment building after the incident with her cousin, 300 of her new neighbors in that building received a letter that said she was a part-time sex worker. Scientology itself imported her book into foreign countries solely with the intent of suing her in jurisdictions where libel laws were stricter than in the United States. Paulette was sued 19 times by the Church of Scientology. But that wasn't all. Church members also stole her stationery without her knowing. She believes this happened by a man who befriended her and later became her roommate. She would eventually find out he was a Scientologist assigned to keep a daily journal on her activities and behavior. More letters were sent to her friends and family stating she had STDs and molested children. None of these things were true, of course, but Paulette sunk into a deep depression. Her fiancé and friends left her as Scientology now consumed her life, and having to pay tens of thousands of dollars to retain a lawyer, she began drinking heavily, smoking, and in her own words, popping Valium like M&Ms. Bravely, she decided to seek the help of a therapist. Therapy seemed to be helping until Scientologists broke into her therapist's office, stole Paulette's records, and sent excerpts of her therapy sessions to everyone she knew. But this was only the beginning. One day, an FBI agent showed up at her apartment and stated the Church of Scientology had received 2 anonymous bomb threats. The church named Paulette as the likely suspect. The church also gave the FBI 2 letters the bomb threats were supposedly mailed on, where they found Paulette's fingerprints on the stationery. That is when she realized it was the church who stole her stationery. The FBI wouldn't hear of it, however, and Paulette, who wasn't even 30 years old, was indicted on multiple federal charges and faced over 15 years in jail. This young woman's life was being systematically destroyed by a church. This is what's known as fair game. Fair game is used to describe the horrendous practices carried out by the Church of Scientology towards people or groups it deems enemies. Hubbard established the policy in the 1950s in response to criticism from within and outside his organization. People who are fair game are judged to be a threat to the church and, according to the policy, can be punished, harassed, and/or destroyed by any and all means possible. In 1968, Hubbard officially canceled use of the term fair game because of the negative press, but behind the scenes, the church's aggressive response to criticism continued. By a stroke of luck and the FBI, Paulette Cooper would be somewhat spared. There was a professor who had been interviewing multiple ex-Scientologists, learning about the church's fair game policy, and he discovered certain high-ranking Scientologists received lucrative gifts and property immediately after Paulette's indictment. This compiled information was given to the FBI, and in another separate investigation involving the church, the FBI raided 3 Scientology offices, seizing thousands of documents. Within these church documents were detailed plans to destroy Paulette. It listed everything from stealing her stationery to get her fingerprints, and even something the church labeled Operation Freakout. Operation Freakout was their mission to get Paulette, quote, incarcerated in a mental institution or jail, or at least to hit her so hard that she drops her attacks. End quote. A grand jury in New York spent 3 years investigating Paulette's frame-up, but all the Scientologists who were tried refused to talk. The case went nowhere. At the same time, in Washington, D.C., a grand jury and trial eventually jailed 11 Scientologists who were involved in wiretapping, infiltration, and theft of government documents. One of those Scientologists who went to jail was Mary Sue Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard's 3rd wife. In that trial, it came to light that some of the other Scientologists who were jailed were also involved in the setup and harassment against Paulette. Paulette sued the Church of Scientology, and a settlement was finally reached in 1985. Paulette stopped drinking and smoking, began helping other victims of Scientology who reached out to her, and slowly began rebuilding her life. 1 year later, in January of 1986, Scientology went through its biggest test of faith when L. Ron Hubbard died after several health issues. The word from the church was that he hadn't so much died as he had moved on from his human body to carry on further studies in another realm. With their founders passing, the leaders of the church were now faced with the challenge of identifying a new leader. 1986 was the same year Tom Cruise officially became a Scientologist. By that time, celebrities like Priscilla and Lisa Marie Presley, John Travolta, and Kirstie Alley were deeply entrenched. But Tom brought a level of celebrity the church had never before experienced. with the passing of L. Ron Hubbard and the initiation of Tom Cruise, a new era of Scientology was about to begin. In 2013, two ex-cops spoke with the Tampa Bay Times about how the Church of Scientology, using parishioner money, paid them $30,000 a month to track a former member, and they were paid to do so for 25 years. They were tracking a man named Pat Bakker. Initially, the church told them it was because Pat stole $1.8 million and critically important documents written by Hubbard before his death. When Pat first left Scientology and moved into a motel, these two ex-cops turned private investigators rented the unit next to his and outfitted it with surveillance gear. They placed a tracking device on his truck, and when Pat, without warning, moved out of state in the middle of the night, they raided his girlfriend's trash to find out where he went. This was easy to do since they had already been tracking her, too. These two PIs tracked Pat from his California apartment to the mountain ranges in Wyoming, and even the Czech Republic, where Pat enrolled in med school. They paid off his garbage men and went through every last document. They reported daily to the church their findings. It was through doing so these two PIs learned Pat wasn't who the church said he was. In fact, he was David Miscavige's archenemy. Pat Bakker was L. Ron Hubbard's number 2 in command, and was one of few in contact with Hubbard in his final years. Due to ongoing investigations by the FBI and IRS, Hubbard went into hiding a few years before his death. He traveled around California in a motorhome until buying a ranch in San Luis Obispo County in 1983. The entire time Hubbard remained hidden until his death, Pat Bakker and his then-wife Annie stayed with him. Church management was forbidden to contact Hubbard or come to the ranch. Pat was his messenger and only form of outside communication. It was assumed by everyone Pat would take over as the leader of Scientology once Hubbard passed, and this is where David arranged a hostile takeover. After Hubbard's death in 1986, Pat and Annie Bakker presented a memo to the church they claimed was written by Hubbard 6 days before he died, in which Hubbard specified that Pat and Annie Bakker should succeed him as the heads of the church following his death. But David, who was a Sea Org captain at the time, used his position to discredit and smear Pat's reputation and anyone loyal to him. They were either labeled SPs or demoted and sentenced to hard physical labor. Less than a year and a half later, the Bakkers were eventually removed and David titled himself chairman of the board. David also published a follow-up memo stating the original memo that instructed Pat to become Hubbard's successor was a forgery and would not be followed by the church. Pat and Annie Bakker later divorced, and Pat would be stalked by the Church of Scientology through two private investigators for 25 years. An investigation that produced nothing of substance. David Miscavige was born in Bristol Township, a suburb of Philadelphia in 1960. His family was Catholic, but as a young boy, David's father, Ron, became interested in Scientology in 1971. Ron noticed that David was sick often with asthma and allergies, so in a decision he would one day regret, he took David to the church to see if they could help his asthma through auditing. At 9 years old, David was given his first auditing session, and the young boy came out of the room smiling from ear to ear. The entire Miscavige family would soon join Scientology, and it wasn't long before David became a devout believer. At age 16, he was given permission to drop out of high school to work in the Sea Org, where he quickly rose through the ranks and became a messenger for Hubbard, eventually seizing power in 1987. Once officially declared the leader of Scientology, he was presented as the trusted friend and advisor of Hubbard and heroic savior of the religion. As David's bio reads, David cleaned out a whole faction of rogue church members who were trying to disassemble Scientology from within. It now states David was Hubbard's protege, and that he was the only one Hubbard trusted to ensure Scientology stood the test of time. Let's let David tell why someone should join Scientology. The following is from 1992 and is a segment of David Miscavige's first and last public media interview.
I'd like to begin, Mr. Miscavige, with, I guess, the kind of broad question that perhaps folks at home may be asking themselves right now, but let me be the guinea pig for a moment. See if you can explain to me why I would want to be a Scientologist.
Because you care about yourself and life itself. Scientology, the word means study of life, study of knowledge. And that's what it is. It takes up all areas of life itself. Things that are integral and maxims that are related to life and very existence. Let me give you an example. It's better if I take that because it is such a broad-ranging subject covering so many different areas. The subject of communication. This is something that major breakthroughs exist in Scientology. Being able to communicate in the world around you, and I think everybody would agree that this is an important subject. Well, there's an actual formula for communication which can be understood. You can drill on this formula of communication and learn to drill. But moreover, take the person who has trouble communicating, well, for some reason he can't, anxiety or whatever.
I'll tell you what, let's stick with me, okay? So far in life, I haven't had a whole lot of trouble communicating. Now, see if you can communicate to me what it is that you're going to be able to do for me that makes me a better communicator.
Well, in Scientology, you don't do anything for somebody else. Scientology is something that requires somebody's active participation.
Then, fine.
And certainly, let me explain something.
I want to participate. I want to be active.
Okay,
clearly,
what in your life, Ted, what in your life do you not feel is right that you would like handled?
I feel perfectly comfortable with my life. I like my job. I'm happy with my family. I love my wife. I'm healthy. I'm perfectly content. That's why I'm asking you, what is it you can do for me?
Well, number one, I would never try to talk you into that Scientology is for you. You see, that's a funny thing about this, is if I'm now going to give a sales pitch to you on Scientology, believe me, Scientology is valuable enough that it doesn't require any sales pitch. But let's look at it this way then, what Scientology does. If you look out across the world today, you could say that if you take a person who's healthy, doing well, like yourself, you'd say that that person is normal, not a crazy, not somebody who's a psychotic. You look at a wall and they call it an elephant. Would you agree with me on that?
So far, I got no problem.
And you can see people below that.
Right.
And crazy people, criminals, that I think society in general will look at and say that breed of person hasn't something quite right because they're not up to this level of personality. You can understand that. Well, we in Scientology are not, you see, all past attempts have been to bring man up to somebody's standard of what's normal. What we're trying to do in Scientology is take somebody from this higher level and move them up to greater ability. You see, we're interested in
what about those folks down there?
Well, yes, no, we don't ignore them, but my point is this: Scientology is there to help the able become more able. The guy who's going around, he's working, he's trying to make it. These people generally have something in their life that they would like to improve. And in any event, if you can increase that person's ability, the one who's chipping in, the one who's able, and bring him up higher, the sphere of influence that he affects in the world around him can be much greater, and he can get on and do better.
Now, Mr. Miscavige, when you and I talked the first time, a few months ago, I said to you I was going to come after you on some of these issues. I am a cynic by nature. I guess that's why I like being a reporter. What you have described to me there fits perfectly with the image that I have of Scientology. Namely, you're interested in folks who are producing. Another way of saying that is you're interested in folks who've got money and who can pay to work their way up the Scientology ladder.
That's where you missed the point, because in fact, you know, this subject of money comes up, but you've got the wrong issue there. The subject of money is, where's it going? You see, another part that isn't in that piece, the money in Scientology isn't going to me, it's not going to my colleagues. That's a fact. That's a fact. You can call up the IRS and find that fact out. They've audited our records and seen all of that, and none of that money is going anywhere. As a matter of fact, the officials in the church are paid far less and live far more frugal existences than any other church leader.
But those who worked alongside David prior to his ascension and who have since left the church tell an entirely different story about its culture. There are numerous allegations of a culture of violence in the church enabled and encouraged by leadership, and in particular, David Miscavige. David is alleged to be a very intense, secretive, and paranoid man, and when he first took control of the church, before bottled water was common, he was known to cover his water glass with plastic wrap in case anyone should try to poison him. He works out often and is said to be a control freak. It's been reported that everything that happens in Scientology right down to the soap they're going to use on their luxury cruise liner, is submitted to David for approval. He demands every Scientology center have gum, Camel cigarettes, now unopened bottles of mineral water, and a pile of new Mont Blanc pens ready and waiting for him in every conference room. While researching for this script, I discovered Mont Blanc pens are considered the best of the best and retail anywhere from $270 to several $1,000s per pen, because God forbid you have to write with a Bic. Several ex-members recall how David would frequently kick, punch, and choke members of the Sea Org. One member was quoted as saying, "David asked me a question, and I couldn't tell you what the question is. Don't remember. The next thing I knew, I have been smacked in the face and knocked down on the ground in front of all these people. This is essentially the Pope knocking me to the ground." And another said, "He jumped up on the conference room table, like with his feet right on the conference room table, and launched himself across the table at me. I was standing, and he battered my face and then shoved me down to the floor." In 2011, just before midnight on New Year's Eve, a former Sea Org member named Debbie Cook raised concerns about David's leadership in an internal email she sent to 12,000 church members. Although Debbie left the Sea Org, she was still in good standing with the church. Debbie's email carried significant weight because for 17 years she had held the title of Sea Org captain. In her email, Debbie extensively detailed how David was straying from L. Ron Hubbard's directives and shifting the church in a new direction. She wrote how he disestablished the committee whose objective was oversight of the leadership team. Debbie was also concerned that since David took over, he began requiring members who progressed up the bridge to redo their auditing and pay the fees again, despite many of them being members for decades. She chastised the way excess fundraising was being handled and stated the church had over $1 billion in international reserves. She warned that speaking out might come at a great personal cost, but that it was every Scientologist's duty to ensure the religion went forward in the way Hubbard intended. She asked members to stick with Scientology, but to adhere only to the teachings as they were handed down by Hubbard, not those created by David. What those recipients of Debbie's email didn't know was why Debbie stopped working for the church. In 2007, Debbie was in her church office and on the phone with David when someone started angrily pounding on her door. Not wanting to anger her boss by interrupting the call, she didn't answer. The pounding stopped, but then Debbie noticed two men prying open her office window with crowbars. They crawled inside, and over the phone, David asked, "Are they there?" Debbie said yes, and David replied, "Goodbye." Debbie was removed from her office by the two men and imprisoned in what could allegedly be called Scientology's jail. Debbie later revealed the jail was nicknamed The Hole. The Hole is two rundown buildings in the California desert, established by David as a holding place for anyone who dared speak out against the church or him or was suspected of sabotage. Over 50 people at a time could be locked in a room and only given old leftovers for food and made to sleep on dirty, ant-infested floors. During their imprisonment, they undergo torture and shaming. During Debbie's stay, David had the electricity turned off for 2 weeks when temperatures hit 106 degrees in the California summer. Those in the hole are only released after signing a document confessing to their so-called crimes, and after agreeing to never speak of their experience in the hole with anyone. After her 7-week imprisonment, Debbie left the Sea Org but signed a severance agreement to never speak ill of the church. The email Debbie sent out to the 12,000 members would violate that agreement, and she was subsequently sued by the church. The church planned on quickly silencing Debbie and collecting damages, but this line of thinking would backfire. Despite the church's objections, Debbie took to the stand in her own defense where she detailed her experiences under David's leadership and her time in the hole. And this is what makes Debbie's story unique to Scientology and its many lawsuits. Debbie Cook is the only person to ever testify under oath about the church's atrocities and have it be public record. Debbie went on to detail the horrible torture she and others in the hole endured at the command of David Miscavige.
What was the first thing that you witnessed that personally horrified and frightened you?
I witnessed Mr. Miscavige physically punching in the face and wrestling to the ground another very senior executive at Scientology International level.
Did you ever begin to receive, or were you ever the recipient of any violence?
Yes, I was. One time I was called into a conference room and asked some questions, and he ordered his secretary to slap me, and she slapped me so hard I fell over into the chairs. One time Mr. Miscavige ordered his communicator to break my finger if I didn't answer his question.
You yourself ever received physical violence from Mr. Miscavige?
There was really only one physical incident where he was very angry and he walked around a very long conference table to get to me. He was yelling and he came up like as if he was going to choke me, but he didn't. He basically grabbed my shoulders and shook me while he was yelling at me.
Let's talk about how you ended up in the hole. You told us that the hole consisted of a couple of, I think, double-wide trailers.
Yes.
What made it a hole rather than a couple of double-wide trailers that people were living in? Describe it for us.
It had bars on the windows, and the one entrance was guarded by security 24 hours a day. And it contained in it, at the time that I went into the hole in May of 2007, there was over 100 top Scientology International executives that had been put there. And the hole basically was some kind of a slang term that had been coined long before I got there. And it was where you ate there, you slept there on the floor, and you never left with the exception of a brief period to go take a shower from that.
When you say slept there on the floor, did you have cots or bunks or some kind of beds?
No, you slept you were given a sleeping bag, you slept on the floor in a sleeping bag.
Why didn't you just take off and get away from the hole?
Not possible. Absolutely not physically possible. You couldn't make it past security. The windows were barred. Right from the beginning when I went in, I obviously was trying to figure out, plotting how to get out.
Were you used to, in your life, getting beaten up? Was that something you were used to?
No, never.
And you were a 40-something-year-old woman with a very, very respected job.
Yes.
Due to the graphic nature of her testimony, I will link Debbie Cook's full testimony below in the description box. After a brief intermission where Debbie was expected to continue her testimony, the church's lawyers abandoned the hearing and offered her a settlement, meaning the lawsuit Scientology brought against Debbie Cook didn't last more than 1 day of testimony. Debbie agreed to a settlement. It's not only ex-members who have come out against David. He has also been accused of coercive fundraising practices, emotional abuse of subordinates, and harassment of journalists who are critical of Scientology. But from Scientology's perspective, David's leadership has been central to the success of the church. It was under his guidance that the Church of Scientology achieved a major milestone in 1993 when the IRS granted it tax-exempt status and was classified as a religious organization. This only happened because of David's alleged campaign of harassment against individual IRS employees and the organization itself. David ordered rank-and-file Scientologists to file individual lawsuits against the IRS, which came to about 2,400 lawsuits all at once. They sued in every jurisdiction and for things that would anger the average taxpayer once it became a matter of public record. The church paid for space in prominent magazines where they denigrated the IRS and told stories of how the IRS was out of control. According to ex-Scientologist Marty Rathbun, who attended the private meeting, David told IRS Commissioner Fred Goldberg that if Scientology was granted tax exemption, all of the 2,400 lawsuits against the IRS would go away overnight. On October 1st of 1993, Scientology and all of Hubbard's books were deemed religious texts. The church was officially given tax-exempt status. At a Scientology celebration in which David deemed the war is over, he shared photos of himself celebrating with IRS officials. While Scientology has been recognized as a religion in a number of other countries, most have not given it a tax-exempt status. In Argentina, Scientology is officially recognized as a cult. According to leaked tax documents, by 2012, the church had a combined $1.7 billion in assets, as well as an annual income of more than $200 million. The church has an international property portfolio with a combined 12 million square feet of real estate. Many of their property holdings are sprawling mansions and ornately refurbished architectural landmarks. This includes a 64,000 square foot castle in South Africa, to an 11-story hotel in Florida, and the $57 million Australian headquarters in Sydney. But there is none more strategically located than the 49,000 square foot church located 6 blocks from the White House in Washington, D.C. Despite David's questionable history, he brought another skill set into his role which would become remarkably successful in raising the profile and income of Scientology. It appeared as if David knew exactly how to turn Hollywood superstars from believers into recruiters by giving them exactly what they asked for. When Mimi Rogers introduced Tom Cruise to Scientology in 1986, he became David's first priority. Through Tom, David would increase Scientology's legitimacy and bank accounts. According to Mimi Rogers, after she and Tom had been married only 2 years, her husband approached David and told him he had his eyes set on someone else. That someone was 23-year-old Nicole Kidman, who had just been cast alongside Tom in his latest film, Days of Thunder. Tom needed David's help to eliminate the one problem that was standing between him and a relationship with Nicole, his current wife. David didn't bat an eye at Tom's request. In fact, David would do anything to keep Scientology's most famous member happy. Tom needed help wooing Nicole Kidman, despite David allegedly warning him that she was a potential problem for Scientology. Nicole was a practicing Catholic, but what was worse in the eyes of the church, her father was a psychologist. The science of psychology stands in opposition to the practices of Scientology, due to L. Ron Hubbard's view that psychiatry and psychology are inherently anti-spiritual and opposed to personal freedom and self-realization. Former high-ranking members have stated David was concerned Nicole might convince Tom to leave Scientology altogether, and therefore Nicole Kidman was labeled a PTS, or potential trouble source, by Scientology insiders.
Dentist John Finucane liked the sales pitch he heard and ended up spending over $42,000 on services.
They've tried to milk every penny they can out of any asset that I have, whether it's a credit card, whether it's my home, whether it's from a friend, whether it's from family. If I can get a hold of money anywhere, they would like to have that money.
2 years ago, Finucane responded to a newsletter from Sterling Management, a church-related consultant to health professionals. He says they helped his practice, but also led him into Scientology and kept pushing for even more money. Finucane says they charged $8,500 to his credit cards without permission. When they began phoning for more, he turned on his tape recorder.
Right. So basically, I don't even have enough money for that. just to even get to the point where I can do my auditing.
You have quite a bit, though, John. I mean, you know, but I don't think buying more is your problem. Your problem is your wife.
Because Finucane's wife opposed the church, they declared him a PTS, potential trouble source.
They said, well, you either need to shape things up or disconnect, as they say, which they won't ever say divorce. They just say disconnect.
PTS or not, Tom wanted what he wanted, and David knew there was only one option. David allegedly approached Mimi Rogers and told her directly that she would have no say in the dissolution of her marriage. Despite having been a member of the church since her childhood, Mimi was instantly cut from Tom's life and Nicole was pasted into it. David heard about the couple's fantasy of romantically running through a field of wildflowers, so he decided to make it happen and ordered Sea Org members to till a giant field at Gold Base. Because Gold Base is in the desert, this didn't work out so well. Former Sea Org members stated David was livid and made them rip it up and sod it with grass. David also ordered Sea Org members to build a romantic bungalow for the couple, but then a mudslide wrecked it. For this, David held the entire base responsible and ordered everyone to work 16-hour days until everything was restored. Tom Cruise and Mimi Rogers divorced in 1990, and in December of that year, he and Nicole were married. David was his best man, and it would be far from the last time he got involved in Tom's love life, but more on that later. Tom and Nicole went on to adopt 2 children together, Bella and Connor. At the time of this recording, Isabella Cruz is 32 years old and Connor Cruz is 28. From the early stages of their friendship, David spent millions of dollars on gifts to draw Tom into the fold, including gifting him a villa at Scientology's Gold Base. Gold Base is an exclusive and heavily secured compound located on 500 acres in California. It's where retreats are held for elite members of the church. David instructed Sea Org members to smile at all times when Tom arrives on Gold Base and to always call him sir. Gold Base is where atrocities have occurred, as the hole sits on its 500 acres. When Tom stays at the Gold Base villa, he is waited on hand and foot by Sea Org members. Sea Org members work full-time and long hours, many going years without seeing family. But due to the Sea Org being a faction of Scientology, this is considered volunteer work. Sea Org members are not paid. Instead, their room and board is provided and they are allegedly given a mere allowance of around $50 a week. Per David's instruction, Sea Org members have also customized cars, limos, motorcycles, and an RV called Silver Screen Tom takes on movie sets with him. David had state-of-the-art audiovisual equipment installed by Sea Org members in Tom's home and created a custom aircraft hangar for Tom's collection of airplanes. He's even gifted him a flight simulator. But David went a step above that. Former high-ranking member Mike Rinder reported that Tom's office and household staff are Sea Org members who were personally chosen by David's wife, Shelley Miscavige. Everyone on Tom's staff, from his assistants to his housekeeper, are Scientologists. David ensured Tom had everything he could ever want, no matter where in the world he was filming his latest movie. When Tom's in England, he's stayed many times at L. Ron Hubbard's personal mansion. When in Florida, he stays at luxurious penthouse suites owned by the church. Every location comes with a full staff of Sea Org members ready to attend to his every need. It appears for Sea Org members, Tom Cruise is official church business. Initially, Nicole adapted well to Scientology and willingly participated in the extensive auditing required of her. She progressed along the bridge, but as early as 1992, David began to sense Tom drifting away from Scientology. Tom was usually in daily contact with David, but his marriage to Nicole was coming between them. During the 1996 filming of Eyes Wide Shut, Tom was out of contact with David for a full year, and according to Mike Rinder, this drove David crazy. But David had much bigger things to worry about. 1 year before, on November 18th of 1995, a 36-year-old woman was driving her Jeep through Clearwater, Florida, when she got into a minor accident. Paramedics arrived and found nobody was injured, but the Jeep owner took off her clothes and began walking along the street. Concerned, the paramedic took her into the ambulance where the woman mumbled about not needing a body to live. When asked why she took her clothes off, she replied, quote, "I wanted help. I wanted help." End quote. The woman asking for help was Lisa McPherson. Lisa was transported to a nearby hospital, but not long after, 7 Scientologists, including a few senior officials, arrived and spoke with Lisa, who then refused psychiatric treatment and, against medical advice, was released into the care of the 7. But only 17 days later, after being taken to a Scientology-owned hotel in downtown Clearwater and kept under 24-hour watch, Lisa McPherson would be dead. Lisa McPherson, a native Texan, joined Scientology in 1982 when in her early 20s. She worked as a sales rep for AMC Publishing Company, a business owned by Scientologists that sells advertising for life and health insurance agents. Lisa lived in Clearwater in a $695 a month apartment that she split with a roommate. Lisa lived frugally. She only had a few pieces of jewelry and hardly any furniture, but according to financial documents the church was later ordered to hand over in court, Lisa spent so much of her salary on church courses that she borrowed $33,000 from her employer just to keep up with her Scientology studies. In the last 2 years of her life, Lisa spent over $100,000 on Scientology courses named New Life Rundown and Wall of Fire, among others. 40% of her earnings were going to the church, and her entire annual tax refund was given to the Scientologist employers from whom she had borrowed money. After a failed romance in June of 1995, Lisa shared with a Sea Org member that she was feeling unwell and having thoughts of self-harm. To get her back on the straight and narrow, she went through additional audits and was put through a treatment known as the Introspection Rundown. Hubbard created the Introspection Rundown for treating people who suffer from psychotic episodes or mental breakdowns. Hubbard claimed the technique was a cure and that it, quote, possibly ranks with the major discoveries of the 20th century. He claimed it could eradicate psychiatry, a profession he claimed committed human rights abuses. The first step in the Introspection Rundown is to isolate a person suffering a mental breakdown to protect them and others. No one is allowed to speak to the person or be within their hearing except to deliver lessons that are supposed to locate and correct the problems that led to the mental anguish. The person is given no books, pencils, or paper, and no counseling sessions or treatment.
Hubbard said psychiatry was part of a vast conspiracy to destroy his newly formed church and control mankind. Recent Scientology films still attack psychiatrists as potential killers. Hubbard also announced he had gone beyond psychiatry by literally traveling in space to Venus and Mars and to a distant radiation belt.
I was up in the Van Allen belt. This is factual. And I don't know why they're scared of the Van Allen belt, because it's simply hot. You'll be surprised how warm space is.
Hubbard said he had discovered secrets of the universe so powerful they could only be heard by Scientologists who had spent hundreds of hours studying his programs. Anyone else would be struck dead by the knowledge.
When Lisa was released from her Introspection Rundown, David, who was staying in Clearwater at the time, took a personal interest in her case and became her auditor. By September of that year, he declared Lisa was officially clear. This photo shows her being awarded at a Scientology ceremony. Lisa was cured, or so she thought. But by October, Lisa was back where she started, only this time her symptoms were getting worse. Her colleagues noticed her behavior was odd, and she had to be removed from a number of church events. After her November car accident, the 7 Scientologists took her to the Fort Harrison Hotel, where she was checked into room 174 and put into an even more extreme version of the Introspection Rundown, where she was monitored for 24 hours a day and a daily log was kept of her behavior. On December 5th, 1995, after 17 days of being imprisoned, Lisa's watchers decided she needed medical help. Instead of driving her to one of 4 nearby hospitals only minutes away, they drove her to a hospital 45 minutes away so she could be seen by a Scientologist doctor who they thought wouldn't put her in a psychiatric ward. But by the time they arrived at the hospital, Lisa McPherson was dead. There was no local obituary and no public police report of her death. In fact, it wouldn't be until over a year later on December 16th of 1996 that Lisa McPherson's death leaked to the public. David Miscavige and the church claimed she checked into the Fort Harrison Hotel for rest and relaxation, and then she suddenly fell ill. This angered the county medical examiner Dr. Joan Wood, who spoke out to the media, calling the church's account misinformation. Dr. Wood stated the autopsy indicated that Lisa had gone without water for at least 5 to 10 days, possibly longer.
There has been a war of harassment on the part of the Clearwater PD against the church. We believe that this story wouldn't be a story if Lisa hadn't been a Scientologist.
Abelson also challenges the competency of the ME's office and says it conspired with the police when it issued this autopsy.
They have absolutely no basis to say that she didn't die of natural causes.
How do you know that?
Because I've read the autopsy report.
The autopsy, given to us by Lisa's family, says she died of a blood clot in her heart. But look at the cause of the clot: bed rest and severe dehydration.
This is the most severe case of dehydration I've ever seen.
Dr. Joan Wood, the Pinellas County medical examiner, spoke to us after we interviewed Mr. Abelson. Dr. Wood says while dying of a blood clot is a natural cause, what led up to it, Lisa's severe dehydration, was not. She says tests performed during the autopsy indicate Lisa McPherson went at least 5 days without any liquids.
5 days, you think she went without liquids?
I think 5 to 10 is reasonable. It may have been 17.
What could possibly explain that?
I think there's several possibilities. The first is that she refused to eat or drink. Perhaps she was deprived of food and water. Because if you've ever been thirsty, you know how powerful that thirst drive is.
She rested, she slept a lot. Nothing unusual, really, until the end of her stay. She did get food, water. Obviously, people talked to her. But she got rest and relaxation.
But later in our interview, Mr. Abelson does refer to something unusual.
But it was something very unusual to see this charming 36-year-old woman hitting the wall.
With her body?
No, with her fist.
Kelly Davis was Lisa's closest friend growing up in Texas. She says when Lisa called her in November of 1995, she got the impression she may be leaving the church.
She said she was coming to stay. She said she had to talk to me about a lot of things and that she didn't want to discuss it over the phone.
We know what Lisa endured during those 17 days was horrific due to the 33 pages of handwritten records kept of her last couple of weeks alive. Records that were ordered by a judge to be turned over in the lawsuit Lisa's family brought against the Church of Scientology. Due to its graphic nature and in compliance with YouTube's community guidelines, I won't go into detail of what happened to Lisa during her Scientology imprisonment. However, I will link an article to the full story below in the description box. In 1998, a Florida state attorney charged the Church of Scientology with 2 felonies, but would later drop the charges after Dr. Wood, the same medical examiner who originally spoke out against the church, mysteriously changed Lisa's manner of death from undetermined to accident. In a sworn deposition over a decade later, former Scientology senior executive Marty Rathbun alleged that church officials spent over $20 million on private investigators, operatives, and lavish gifts such as Super Bowl tickets, jewelry, and FaceTime with John Travolta to influence Florida judges and other officials after Lisa McPherson died. In the end, no one was charged in the death of Lisa McPherson, and the church settled with Lisa's family out of court. In her last 5 years alive, Lisa McPherson spent more than $175,000 on Scientology. It was around this time Marty Rathbun claimed he was ordered by David to pull Tom Cruise back in and orchestrate the breakup of Tom and Nicole. Marty claims he did this over 3 years through strategic auditing, from around 1997 to 2000, and everything Tom divulged through auditing was reported daily to David. This included intimate details about Tom's sex life. Marty claimed he hired private investigators to follow Nicole and said Tom wanted Nicole's phone tapped so he could know who she was talking to. Although Tom Cruise's lawyer denies this, Marty said he had it done and a wiretap was installed on Nicole Kidman's phone. Every tape that came in of her private conversations were also given directly to David. Since the early 1990s, a man named Michael Dovin worked for Tom as his personal assistant and chief of staff. While it was Michael's responsibility to assist Tom in his position as an elite actor, he had another more important role Tom wasn't aware of. According to Marty Rathbun, Michael Dovin was a Scientology plant whose primary role was to report everything going on in Tom's life to David. Michael allegedly was the first to tell David Tom and Nicole's marriage was on the rocks. While reporting on this story years ago, a journalist asked Marty Rathbun, quote, "Michael Dovin was personally reporting to you what Tom was doing?" To which Marty replied, quote, "Absolutely. He'd be telling me what was happening with Nick, what was happening in the household, what was happening between Tom and Steven Spielberg. He had been reporting to us from the early 1990s." End quote. In the year 2000, Tom began filming Vanilla Sky with Penelope Cruz, and he was taken by her. While still attempting to get Nicole out of the picture, Mike Rinder claimed their attention turned to Tom and Nicole's adopted children. Bella was 8 and Connor was 6 when they were allegedly given a course in identifying suppressive persons, with the intent to turn them against Nicole. In February of 2001, Tom Cruise filed for divorce from Nicole Kidman. It should be noted that although Bella and Connor Cruise chose to live with their father, Nicole Kidman has denied any estrangement with her children and said she, quote, "utterly respects their beliefs." Less than 6 months after their divorce, Tom and Penelope were officially a couple. In an interview from 1 year before, Penelope was asked if she's religious, to which she replied, quote, "No, I do not call myself anything. I was raised as a Catholic, but I believe in God in my own way, and I pray in my own way, and I respect all kinds of philosophies. The one philosophy or religion I find I am most close to is the Buddhist one. I think it is the one that respects others and the one that doesn't say that this is the only way. I think happiness is the moment when, if you've forgotten those little things, they suddenly come back into focus for you." End quote. Penelope Cruz never became a Scientologist, and for whatever reason, she and Tom would break up in 2004. That same year, David presented Tom with Scientology's Freedom Medal of Valor, calling Tom the most dedicated Scientologist he knew, to which Tom replied, quote, "Thank you for your trust. Thank you for your confidence in me. I have never met a more competent, a more intelligent, a more tolerant, a more compassionate being outside of what I have experienced from LRH, and I've met the leaders of leaders. I've met them all." End quote.
Thank you. You're welcome. I'm really, really honored to be here with you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your trust. Thank you for your confidence in me. And I've personally been very privileged to see what you do to help, to protect, to serve all of us. These are the times now, people, okay? These are the times we will all remember. Were you there? What did you do? I think you know that I am there for you. And I do care so very, very, very much. So what do you say? We need to clean this place up? Huh? Okay. Because we're counting on you. Okay? All right? To LRH.
Alongside the medal, David commissioned the production of a 30-minute video all about how amazing Tom was and how he was the person every Scientologist should aspire to be like. David had already demonstrated there was nothing he wouldn't do for his favorite Scientologist. There was the love bombing and millions of dollars of gifts and meddling in Tom's love life. It was of little surprise then that after breaking up with Penelope, Tom, according to Mike Rinder, went to David for help finding a new partner. David organized a top-secret team of senior Scientologists led by his wife Shelley to audition female Scientologists as potential partners to keep their most famous disciple happy. As reported by Vanity Fair, the church devised an elaborate auditioning process for which actresses, who were already Scientologists, were called in and told they were auditioning for a new training film. Then they were asked a series of curious questions, including, quote, "What do you think of Tom Cruise?" During the auditioning process, they thought they had found the one when they gave 24-year-old Nazanin Boniati a special assignment. Nazanin had been raised in Scientology, and it was determined she would be the best fit for Tom. She was swiftly moved into the Celebrity Center and away from her family for a month-long preparation where she would be audited every day and certain problems could be addressed. One of these problems was that she had a boyfriend. Mike Rinder claims officials gave Nazanin her boyfriend's auditing transcript in which he admitted to cheating on her. She subsequently broke up with him. She was then given a makeover. Her braces were removed, her hair was colored brown to remove any red highlights, and she was taken shopping in Beverly Hills, where the church spent $20,000 on clothes for her. Nazanin was told her makeover was part of the church's humanitarian mission, and that she needed to look her best for conferences with world leaders. She had no idea that in 1 month's time, she would be living with Hollywood's leading man, Tom Cruise. With her superficial transformation complete, Nazanin was ready for her important mission with so-called world leaders. In November of 2004, she was flown first class to New York to meet Tom. Their first date was dinner at Nobu with several Scientology aides. Then they went ice skating at Rockefeller Center, which had been reserved for only them and closed to the public. Vanity Fair reported Tom and his entourage rented out an entire floor in Trump Tower. And it was there he told Nazanin, "I've never felt this way before." Not long after, she was given a second confidentiality agreement to sign. This one was specifically about Tom. Her parents were worried about her, but she was told to only tell them she was in New York working on a special Scientology project. November was bliss for the couple, who seemed to get along well together. Nazanin soon moved in with Tom in his 11,500 square foot ski chalet in Telluride, Colorado. And then she was completely shut off from the outside world. She was given a credit card issued in the name of Tom's production company. It was her only source of money. It didn't take long for their romance to sour. It was reported that if Nazanin did anything that Tom didn't like, he would report it to his Scientology staff, and she would be audited and reprimanded for it. One example of this is when she first moved in and saw his Freedom Medal of Valor and told him 3 words, "Very well done." That phrase didn't sit well with Tom, who allegedly thought she was treating him like her junior in rank. There was also Tom's intense public displays of affection, something he's known for, which was too much for Nazanin. Tom reportedly complained, quote, "I get more love from an extra than I get from you," end quote. Nazanin was made to do 2 to 3 hours of auditing every day in which she was told to purge herself of negative thoughts about Tom. In one instance, she was belittled for embarrassing Tom by falling off a snowmobile after suffering severe period cramps. When Nazanin made the so-called mistake of seeking medication to help with her symptoms, she was ordered to undergo additional auditing to ensure she was clear enough to remain in Tom's presence. One of Scientology's core beliefs is around the use of Western medicine. Scientologists believe that medication masks a person's ability to become clear. Tom reinforced this belief when he got in a heated argument with Matt Lauer on the Today Show over comments he made criticizing Brooke Shields for using antidepressants to battle postpartum depression. But Scientology's views against Western medicine don't stop with drugs for mental health or pain relief. The original teachings of Dianetics state that all human ailments are psychosomatic, in other words, in your head. Therefore, illnesses can be cured by gaining control over the mind, which can only be achieved through auditing. In 1956, L. Ron Hubbard stated during a lecture that cancer was caused by cells multiplying after coming to the realization that the body they're inhabiting is blocked from having children. Scientologists also believe when a person reaches the highest level of learning, known as OT8, they will be immune to all illnesses, including cancer.
Defectors claim the church tears families apart every day. Roxanne Friend brought her brother into the church. She says he ended up helping to kidnap her.
They put me in a little apartment. They had a guard at the front door and a guard at the back door, and I was not allowed to leave. There was no telephone and no means of communication with the outside world.
Friend claims she was held to convince her not to see a non-Scientologist doctor when she felt sick.
I'd be told, well, yeah, you were ill, but then no, we just need to audit you. Give us, $6,000, $12,000, and we'll audit you, and you'll be flying again. That's a direct quote. We'll get you flying again. Do you know how it looks?
It looks pretty good. Does it? Yeah.
Today, Roxanne has incurable cancer, which she says could have been treated if diagnosed earlier. She spent over $80,000 on Scientology and has almost nothing left and no medical insurance. She blames the church.
You're going to have a sense of anxiety or desperation to do whatever it takes to sign your life away, your money and your mortgage and your child.
Church officials deny these charges made by what they call a handful of disgruntled people, many of whom they say are pursuing lawsuits in order to squeeze the church for money. The defectors' response: there are hundreds of others who are simply afraid to speak out.
After Nazanin and Tom had been living together for a few weeks, David and Shelley Miscavige came over for dinner. But Nazanin had a migraine and was having a difficult time understanding David as he was speaking. A few times she asked, "Excuse me?" in an effort to hear what he said. This infuriated David, who thought she wasn't listening to him. And the next day, Tom screamed at her for insulting the head of the church. 3 months after being assigned the special mission to become the next Mrs. Cruz, Nazanin was transported to a hotel and advised by then church official Tommy Davis that her relationship with Tom was over. She never heard from him again, and after confiding in a Scientologist friend about her heartbreak, she was written up in a 10-page knowledge report for making negative comments about Tom. For Nazanin's crime, she was sentenced to 4 months of physical labor. She was made to scrub toilets with a toothbrush, clean bathroom tiles with acid, dig ditches in the middle of the night, and more. Nazanin Boniati would later leave the Church of Scientology. It was 2005, and in the same year as their breakup, Tom was casting for his next installment of the Mission Impossible franchise. It's been reported that with Shelley's help, he called in a long list of notable women such as Lindsay Lohan, Jessica Alba, Kate Bosworth, Scarlett Johansson, and Jennifer Garner to audition. But instead of auditioning them for a role as the lead in the film, Tom was allegedly looking for a leading lady of his own. None of the women were a match for Tom until the team came across the profile of an actress who fit the physical characteristics Tom wanted in his next wife. That was Katie Holmes. To top it off, Katie had stated in a 17 magazine interview only a year prior that she had a childhood crush on Tom Cruise. At the time, she was engaged to actor Chris Klein. In April 2005, while Nazanin was digging ditches, 26-year-old Katie, who was newly single, had her first date with 42-year-old Tom on a romantic helicopter ride over LA. Within 2 weeks, she had moved into his mansion, and 1 month after becoming official, Tom made his infamous couch-jumping appearance on the Oprah Winfrey Show. After 2 months of dating, Tom proposed to Katie at the Eiffel Tower. Their romance was swift, they were happy and in love, and a year after their first date, Katie gave birth to Surrey Cruz in silence. In his original writings, L. Ron Hubbard made a rule stating the importance of staying silent during childbirth to ensure the avoidance of engrams. He also believed morning sickness is an engram because it causes pain and distress, and that emotions are transferred to a child through an electrical wave, writing, quote, Therefore, anyone who's emotional around a pregnant woman is communicating that emotion straight to the child." End quote. Hubbard declared childhood illness mostly came from engrams, and to prevent this, one must create a calm and harmonious atmosphere for the child. He also demanded parents say nothing around a sick or injured child. Instead, they were supposed to smile and appear calm, but say nothing. That rule even extended to something as simple as if a child fell down, writing, quote, "If the child falls, she should be helped, but silently." End quote. Hubbard believed what he called drooling sympathy offered to a child when he is sick or feeling unwell can trigger engrams, and that a young child bouncing on a pregnant woman's lap could cause her unborn child to get an engram. He even went as far as to dictate a couple's sex life, allegedly writing that if the husband uses language during sex with his pregnant wife, quote, "every word is going to be engramic." For all these reasons, medical professionals, the one giving birth, and any attending family must remain silent throughout the delivery to avoid adverse effects on the individual being born. Before Katie gave birth to Suri, the media released photos of giant placards being taken into Tom's mansion, one with the instruction to be silent and make all physical movements slow and understandable.
Give me the quick 1-minute version of the
silent birth.
The silent birth.
Another controversy. It is all through Scientology books that even unborn children must be protected from negative emotions. There's a rumor that there's even a mouthpiece to keep the mother silent during birth. Photographers captured Scientology posters being carried into his home.
Be silent, make movements slow, make gestures slow. What is this about?
I don't even know those photos. It's basically just respecting the mother, you know? I mean, and helping to be quiet. Not the mother. The mother makes as much noise, and people, you know, she's going through it.
There's no bit in her mouth.
No. She goes. She does what she's got to do, okay? And there's this whole thing that if she needs medicine, she needs medicine. There's no, we're there, you know, with doctors, and there's, you know, whatever needs to be administered, whatever the woman wants. I'm not going to tell Kate, you know, if she needs an epidural, she's going to get her epidural. And if she's going to make noise, she's going to make noise. But why have other people make noise? You know, you want that area very calm and to make it very special.
6 months after Suri arrived, Tom and Katie held their wedding in a giant castle in Italy. The event was a spectacle, with stars like Jennifer Lopez, David and Victoria Beckham, Will and Jada, Jim Carrey, and Jenny McCarthy. Once again, David served as Tom's best man. In attendance was also Leah Remini, a devout Scientologist at the time. Like other celebrities in Scientology, Leah was given special treatment and catered to with special events and exclusive gatherings at the Celebrity Center, although she would later reveal she was of little interest to the church until the sitcom she was acting in became a hit. King of Queens originally aired on CBS and ran for 9 seasons, spanning from 1998 to 2007. It won multiple awards and is still in syndication at the time of this recording. Leah worked hard and devoted her life, time, and millions of dollars to her religion. She shared that Scientologists devote several hours a day to the church, saying, quote, "I don't think people know the amount of dedication it takes to be in this organization. I mean, it was every day, 3.5 hours minimum, 7 days a week usually." End quote. After becoming a more prominent member of the church, Leah was featured on the cover of Scientology's monthly magazine and began rubbing shoulders with the upper echelons of church society. After a few months, she was introduced to David and Tom, and that's when everything began to change for Leah. She noticed something was off with how Tom was treated. From her perspective, the rules didn't seem to apply to Tom. Her concerns were backed by another high-ranking defector, Mike Rinder. When Mike left Scientology, he spoke out about the double standards that applied to Tom. As an OT7, Tom was seen as equivalent to David, both of whom are only outranked by the founder himself, L. Ron Hubbard. Yet no matter their status, the rules were still meant to apply equally. Leah recalled writing a knowledge report on Tom for various misbehaviors, as all Scientologists are expected to do. She wrote a report on him for the couch jumping incident and for his public attack on Brooke Shields for using medication to combat postpartum depression. She thought he was making Scientology look bad, but every time she submitted the report, it was Leah who got in trouble, not Tom. As Leah put it, quote, Being critical of Tom Cruise is being critical of Scientology itself. You are a person who is anti the aims and goals of Scientology. You are evil." End quote. And while it seemed Scientology had finally given Tom everything his heart desired, Leah, who had been a Scientologist since she was 9 years old, was having a very different experience, one that would escalate at Tom and Katie's wedding. Before attending their wedding in November of 2006, Leah was told she could bring along Jennifer Lopez and Mark Anthony as her guests, as she claims the church wanted to recruit them. While at the wedding, Leah was surprised to find the First Lady of Scientology, Shelley Miscavige, noticeably absent from David's side. Prior to the wedding, Leah noticed Shelley missing from a number of high-profile events. This didn't make sense, as Shelley was considered second in command. David is COB, aka Chairman of the Board, and Shelley is COB assistant. It was her job to write and record everything her husband said and did in Scientology. Shelley and David married a few years before he became the leader, and after his ascension, he was rarely seen without her. Shelley and Leah met as children while working in the Sea Org. Leah was only 13 years old when she signed a billion-year contract to be of service to Scientology. Shelley when she was 12. Although Leah later got out of the Sea Org and was a civilian Scientologist, she and Shelley remained close, regularly writing each other letters throughout the decades and spending time together when possible. But Leah's letters had gone unanswered for some time. So when she arrived at what the church called the wedding of the century, only to find Shelley not in attendance, she found it strange. When Leah saw several top executives at the reception, she innocently asked, "Where is Shelley?" To her surprise, she was told she didn't have the quote, "fucking rank" to demand information about the leader's wife. After that, every top Scientologist in earshot scattered. Leah had no idea such a simple question would turn her world upside down. While at the wedding, Leah was appalled at the behavior of many top Scientologists, including David's, who she believed was acting inappropriately with his communications advisor, Laurice Henley Smith, who had accompanied David to Italy. Leah returned to the States and wrote a knowledge report about the top officials' behavior, including David. But this would backfire when Leah was called in for auditing, where she was told dozens of Scientologists submitted knowledge reports complaining she had caused a scene and ruined Tom and Katie's wedding. Some of the reports accused her of being loud and rude, switching tables at the reception, and for upgrading her hotel room, among other so-called bad behavior. Leah claimed she had become annoyed during the 3-day affair, as it seemed the top-level Scientologists kept attempting to separate her from Jennifer by having them sit at separate tables and being escorted in different cars. Katie even wrote a 9-page knowledge report about Leah, referring to her behavior as very upsetting, accusing her of disrupting the reception and being a poor example to others. She went on to say that Leah made the party all about herself and concluded the report by stating all of Leah's bad behavior disturbed her greatly. Leah was in shock and hurt that she had upset so many Scientologists. She was then ordered to travel to Florida for reprogramming at her own expense. Reprogramming is Scientology speak for hard labor. For over 3 months, Leah remained at the Scientology headquarters in Clearwater, Florida, getting reprogrammed, where they had her working and being sec-checked from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m., all the while being reprimanded for her behavior at Tom and Katie's wedding. Leah's reprogramming would cost her $300,000 in total. But even after that, she still didn't consider leaving the church, as she stated, quote, "Leaving the church means giving up everything you have ever known and everything you have worked for your whole life." End quote. For years after her reprogramming, Leah was still unable to make contact with her close friend. In fact, the last known sighting of Shelley Miscavige was in 2007 when she was escorted to her father's funeral. In the years since Shelley was last seen, rumors have swirled that David sent her away to undergo intense behavior modification treatment because she dared to question her husband, something that defies his rank. Leah Remini and Mike Rinder claimed that because David was a higher rank in Scientology, Shelley would not be allowed to question him, even in their personal lives as husband and wife. After Shelley's disappearance, David was rarely seen without his communications advisor Larisse at his side. She is often seen going with him on various trips alone. Ex-members have alleged that David encouraged her to divorce her husband at the height of his battle with multiple sclerosis. Medical conditions like MS are considered out of ethics by Scientology doctrine, as it views such medical conditions as the result of a crime one has committed in this life or a prior one. They claim it can only be treated through intense auditing, not actual medical attention. Leah continued to keep her head down and send unanswered gifts and letters to Shelley. Meanwhile, it was assumed by the media that Katie Holmes was heavily brainwashed by her husband's religion, with one media outlet even calling her a Scientology zombie. And while she may have been taken with the church at one time, Katie, who was raised Catholic, was growing unsettled with her life circumstances by 2012. It's been alleged Katie worried about Surrey's Scientology indoctrination, as sect checks can begin on children as young as 6 years old. Surrey would turn 6 in April of that year. And so, Katie began secretly planning her and Surrey's escape. She knew David had a surveillance network who were keeping close tabs on her, so she became brilliantly strategic in her legal maneuvering. And while the Church of Scientology had been worried about Nicole Kidman's father, the psychologist, they should have been worried about Katie's father, Martin J. Holmes Sr., an attorney in Ohio since 1971, who specializes in matrimonial law, personal injury, wrongful death litigation, and more. It was reported that Martin Holmes helped Katie in every detail of her escape plan. Daddy Holmes arranged for burner phones, bodyguards, and assistants in their secret planning. During those months of planning, Katie allegedly cut off friendships she and Tom shared, fired her Scientology staff, and rented a New York apartment in her name only. While Tom was promoting Rock of Ages in Europe, Katie was preparing to star in a Broadway play and moved into her new apartment, allegedly telling Tom it had more privacy, which helped shield her from paparazzi. Katie would hire a total of 3 lawyers, and on June 28th of 2012, she gave an interview for C magazine, in which she didn't mention Tom's name once. When specifically asked during the interview if having Surrey made her closer to her husband, Katie replied, quote, "I don't know. I don't know. People have been having babies a long time," end quote. The very next day, Katie Holmes, through one of her 3 attorneys, startled the world when she filed for divorce from one of the most powerful men in Hollywood and requested sole custody of their child. It was alleged that Tom had no idea divorce was even on the table. Marquette University Law School speculated that Katie may have filed for divorce in a New York court instead of California because New York is more likely than a California court to grant sole custody when parents cannot agree on child-rearing issues. Tom's publicist released a statement that he was deeply saddened about the news and was concentrating on his 3 children. Their divorce was settled in less than 2 weeks, with Katie retaining full custody of Surrey and Tom being given generous visitation. It would later be revealed in 2013 while testifying in a defamation case Tom took against Bauer Media, who claimed he abandoned his daughter. Tom was asked if Katie left him, quote, "in part to protect Surrey from Scientology." When pushed for an answer, Tom responded, quote, "Did she say that? That was one of the assertions, yes," end quote. In the same deposition, Tom admitted his daughter Surrey was no longer a practicing member of Scientology, but insisted, quote, "There is no need to protect my daughter from my religion," end quote. It was said by Mike Rinder that Katie Holmes and Surrey Cruz were declared suppressive persons after the divorce. The way Katie kept the divorce secret from Tom shocked Leah Remini. By this point, Leah had witnessed many top officials leave the church, and she was feeling the strain of her religion affecting her relationship with her daughter. She also began to grow bitter about the amount of money she had spent moving up the bridge, only to read Hubbard's secret texts, which felt more like science fiction than the mind-blowing revelations she'd been led to believe. And she was still being kept in the dark about Shelley's whereabouts. During a conversation with David Miscavige, Leah was allegedly told that Shelley had to be kept away because SPs were constantly trying to have her subpoenaed. In another conversation, Leah was told that Shelley was working at Goldbase. One day, Leah decided to get on the internet and search what critics were saying about her church, something Scientologists are forbidden to do. She was horrified at what she found. Still, she knew if she left, her entire family would have to disconnect from her. But when 2 senior church officials showed up at her home and told her to back off from trying to contact Shelley, Leah knew she had had enough. It was time to leave. In July of 2013, Leah exited the church for good. To her relief, her husband, mother, and other family members left Scientology alongside her. With her suspicions heightened and Shelley's whereabouts still a mystery, Leah contacted the Los Angeles Police Department and filed a missing person report on Shelley only weeks after leaving the church. She told them that she, along with many of Shelley's colleagues and friends, were very worried about her. She also gave them the names of former Scientologists who would corroborate her concerns. Part of the missing persons report stated that on 2 separate occasions, Leah observed Shelley get nervous and anxious when her husband was around. So let's break down what the LAPD did after this report was filed. The following was reported by Yashar Ali, who interviewed 11 sources, former Scientologists, elected officials, law enforcement contacts, and sources in the entertainment industry, along with a review of documents. First, LAPD detectives spoke with a longtime attorney for Scientology named Jeffrey Riffer about where this meeting with Shelley would take place and what she would agree to do upon meeting with the detectives. But this meeting wouldn't take place in a police station, at David and Shelley's home, or any Scientology facility. Instead, the officers agreed to meet her at a coffee shop. Once there, they met a woman who called herself Shelley. They checked her ID, took her fingerprints, and returned to LAPD headquarters where they sent 2 sets of fingerprints to their lab. The coffee shop fingerprints and another pair that were on Shelley Miscavige's record with the California DMV. Only 24 hours after receiving both sets of prints, 2 lab techs alerted the detectives to tell them the results. The fingerprints taken at the coffee shop could not definitively be matched to the fingerprints the California DMV had on record for Shelley. The lab labeled the results as inconclusive. Instead of contacting Shelley's attorney to arrange for another set of prints to be taken, the LAPD removed Shelley Miscavige from the missing persons database, closed the case, and issued a press release labeling Leah Remini's report as unfounded. For his article, Ali had fingerprint experts examine the prints. These experts said the lab technicians shouldn't have even attempted to match the fingerprints because the prints taken by the LAPD detectives at the coffee shop weren't of high enough quality to conduct a match. Without prior knowledge about the subject of Ali's story or Shelley's association with Scientology, one of the experts asked if the person who provided their fingerprint at the coffee shop had been trained to intentionally leave a fingerprint that wouldn't be suitable for a match. But this is nothing compared to what would happen next. Only a few days after the LAPD detectives met at the coffee shop, they contacted said shop to obtain security camera footage from that meeting. Keep in mind, this was after the missing persons case had been closed. 1 week later, the coffee shop submitted the footage, which had been completely scrambled from every angle. This is a screenshot taken from that video. I will link Yashar Ali's full report on the LAPD's mishandling of Shelley's disappearance below in the description box. Afterwards, the Church of Scientology released its own statement, blasting Leah Remini as a bitter ex-Scientologist, and writing, Miss Remini also continues her bizarre efforts to harass the Church of Scientology's leader and his wife, whom Miss Remini has been obsessed with and has stalked for years. The church went on to accuse Leah of engaging in a publicity stunt motivated by hate and money. This photo of Shelley, taken in 2010 from a DMV, is the only public photo of her since she went missing in 2007. Besides the coffee shop meeting with the LAPD, at the time of this recording, Shelley Miscavige has not been seen in public in over 17 years. Then, in 2022, David went into hiding. That year, 3 former Sea Org members, Laura Baxter and married couple Valeska and Gwen Paris, sued 5 Scientology entities and David Miscavige in a Tampa, Florida court, claiming they endured a world filled with abuse, violence, intimidation, and fear. Their lawsuit also claimed they were trafficked by the church because they joined the Sea Org and signed a billion-year contract when they were children, where they were then placed on a ship they could not leave and were routinely punished by being humiliated, interrogated, and imprisoned for the sole purpose of ensuring they continued performing back-breaking labor for free. But this lawsuit wasn't able to proceed because for much of 2022, David avoided being served. Finally, in February of 2023, after the 27th attempt to serve him in 5 different locations, a U.S. magistrate judge ruled that David Miscavige was, quote, actively concealing his whereabouts or evading service in a federal trafficking lawsuit and declared him officially served. The case was now able to move forward. However, with religious organizations still wielding obscene amounts of tax-free power in the United States, the federal judge presiding over the case ruled that because the 3 victims signed contracts with the church, they must bring their claims of human trafficking to an arbitration panel of Scientologists, not the U.S. justice system. The 3 victims countered that the contracts, some signed as children and others signed when they were adults, were signed under severe duress, including imprisonment and threats of economic and physical harm. They argued the contract agreements they signed are invalid because Scientology teaches that defectors are suppressive persons. Therefore, they could never receive a fair hearing from internal arbitrators who view them as enemies of the church. But Judge Tom Barber wrote that deciding whether Scientology teachings render the agreements unenforceable would require the court to interpret religious doctrine, something the First Amendment forbids. Scientology praised Judge Barber's ruling, meaning it's now up to David and his henchmen to decide whether or not he was involved with human trafficking. The victims stated they will continue their fight. David has continually escaped prosecution. It recently came to light that in 2010, the FBI was close to carrying out a raid on the Sea Org's headquarters. Agents had gone so far as to plan how to cover potential escape routes because they feared David and other senior members would escape, taking critical evidence with them. According to released FBI files, at one point they were concerned Tom Cruise might use his piloting skills to fly David away from the raid. Eventually, the investigation was canned under what some might call suspicious circumstances, though no explanation has ever been officially provided. Despite the claims of violence, abuse, mistreatment, disconnection, and alien warfare, Scientology continues on. In 2007, a church official claimed Scientology had 3.5 million members in the United States. But according to a 2001 survey published by the City University of New York, 55,000 people in the United States, if asked to identify their religion, would say it's Scientology. Today, it's estimated there are less than 40,000 Scientologists worldwide. After the release of Leah Remini's 2015 tell-all book, a representative for Katie Holmes released a public statement that said, quote, "I regret having upset Leah in the past and wish her only the best in the future," end quote.
Cruise's ex-wife, Katie Holmes, issued a statement that we saw in Friday's special, and wish her only the best in the future. You're smiling.
Yes, I'm smiling because it almost makes me want to cry. It makes me emotional because at the time the Katie and this particular crew were writing reports, it caused me a lot of time and pain and my family being reprogrammed. So at the time, I was fighting with her, I guess, for the lack of a better word, within the church. And now I know really what she was going through, because at the time I was thinking of myself and my family and what we were going through, and although painful, I had no idea she was going through probably a lot more. And looking back now and now seeing her and Suri out there in the world, and her being able to be with her daughter and live her life is, you know, I'm touched by it. I'm touched by it because I know now she did what she did leaving in the way that she did because she had to protect her daughter, which in a way connects us now. And because
part of what you did was to protect your daughter.
Right, because I didn't want my daughter to choose the church ultimately, which is what I felt I would be raising, was that you choose your church, which so many families do in these kind of extremist religions.
I bet there's a lot you like to say to Katie.
Yes, yes, but it's really because we both left that we're able to have this kind of grace towards each other, because we're back to being human.
In August of 2023, Leah Remini sued the Church of Scientology, seeking unspecified damages along with injunctive relief to, quote, end Scientology's policies against suppressive persons so that current and former Scientologists and others who wish to expose Scientology's abuses, including journalists and advocates, may feel free to hold Scientology accountable without the fear that they will be threatened into silence. She and Mike Rinder also co-host the podcast Scientology Fair Game. Mike Rinder recently battled esophageal cancer, but fortunately a recent scan did not show any cancer. His treatment is working and he will continue to be monitored. In June of 2023, Leah wrote on her Instagram, 2 years ago, I had an 8th grade education thanks to spending 35 years in a cult. And now, at age 52, I've successfully finished my 2nd year at NYU. She encouraged her followers to remember that it's never too late to start again. Paulette Cooper went on to author over 24 books, win 9 writing awards, and spent several years as a travel writer. Today, she lives in Palm Beach, Florida with her husband Paul and their 2 Shih Tzus. She writes a pet column for the Palm Beach Daily News, and in 2020, she was interviewed on Leah and Mike's podcast. Nazanin Boniadi went on to appear in 2 seasons of How I Met Your Mother, as well as the hit TV show Scandal, General Hospital, and its spin-off, General Hospital Night Shift, making her the first contract actor to play a Middle Eastern character in American daytime television history. She is an outspoken activist for Iranians, women, and youth against tyranny. In 2020, she was appointed as an ambassador for Amnesty International UK. Nazanin Boniadi, Leah Remini, and Mike Rinder all follow each other on Instagram. Katie Holmes starred in a variety of Broadway shows, as well as an off-Broadway show called The Wanderers. She recently directed, co-wrote, and starred in the film Rare Objects. At the time of this recording, Suri Cruz is 17 years old and plans to study fashion in New York. Neither she nor her mother are Scientologists. Suri has not been seen in public with her father since he took her on a trip to Disney World in 2012. It's alleged Tom has not seen his daughter in over a decade and has no part in her life other than his financial obligations. Tom Cruise disagrees that his religion caused him to be estranged from Suri, and in 2013 he sued In Touch magazine for $50 million when the outlet reported he abandoned his daughter. As the case played out in court, Tom said he had not seen Suri for 100 days because he was filming a movie overseas called All You Need Is Kill. That movie would later be retitled to Edge of Tomorrow. Tom went on to tell the court that, far from abandoning his daughter, he called her every day, stating, quote, "You have to work at it. I've gotten very good at it. I tell wonderful stories," end quote. But Tom hasn't told any stories about Scientology's victims or his BFF, David Miscavige, and both men remain quiet on the whereabouts of Shelley Miscavige. Given that Tom and David are at the highest OT levels, according to Scientology, they have allegedly recovered the power of leaving their bodies at will, moving inanimate objects, controlling the behavior of animals and other people. Tom Cruise may be the most love-bombed victim in all of Scientology history. But as in all cults, victims become perpetrators. For now, Tom and David will continue to wait for L. Ron Hubbard's return. The Church of Scientology continues to lobby local and state governments, break up marriages and families, and destroy careers and lives. Because Hubbard saw homosexuality as a psychological defect, the church allegedly continues to put those in the LGBTQ community through their own version of conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is a range of harmful and discredited practices that falsely claim to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. It's championed by bigots and many religious organizations. The Church of Scientology denies being homophobic. Many ex-members and victims continue to speak out against the church, with regular protests happening around the world. Ex-Scientology officials have alleged the hole is still being used for punishment, with some Scientologists being held there for as long as 15 years. At the time of this recording, it's unknown if Shelley Miscavige has an escape plan. So only one question remains. Where is Shelley? This has been the Scandals of Scientology, David Miscavige, and Tom Cruise.
I really just say, I think the best thing is for people to read about it themselves. If someone wants to know about it, they just go and read about it themselves. I think that's the best way to do it.
People really need to take time and read a book. You know, that's my advice. You could read New Slant on Life, you could read Dianetics, and I think if you really read it, you'll understand it, but unless you do, you'll speculate. And I think that's a mistake to do that.
And people ask me about Scientology, and the first thing that I'll say is that you should read a book and understand it for yourself and see how it applies.
I just think people should check it out for themselves and not just believe everything that they may happen to just hear or read on the internet. You know, and you go to Scientology.org and find out for yourself. How about that?
The best way for someone to find out what it is to read a book on it.
Read a book on it.
Yeah.
The books.
There's like many Scientology books. That's why you should read a book.
I just want to learn.
It doesn't deal. That's what I mean. You should read a book. Or
well, I'm here now. There's no book. I mean, you're here. But can you tell me about it?
No.
Come on, man. Why not?
Because I've explained why. If you want to know what it is, you should just find out what it is.
If you are a fan of learning about scams, cults, and cautionary tales, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you'll be notified when a new documentary comes out. My name is Josie, and thank you so much for watching.